Let me start this out a little differently than most videos on this topic. When people ask me about safety and crime in Northern Virginia, they usually don't really want statistics. They think they do, but they don't. What they're really asking is something much more personal. Am I going to feel safe living there? Is this a place where I can raise a family? Am I making a mistake moving here, or am I making the right decision? And I get that, because once you've lived somewhere long enough, you start to understand safety isn't just about numbers. It's about how you feel when you pull into your driveway at night. It's about whether you hesitate when you hear a noise outside, or whether you don't even think twice. Now, here's the problem. This topic usually gets handled in one of two ways. Either everything is sugar-coated, or it's exaggerated into something that creates unnecessary fear. Well, I'm not going to do either. I'm going to talk to you the way I would talk to a client sitting right across from me, honestly, calmly, and with a real perspective. Because after living here in Northern Virginia for over 30 years and helping people buy and sell homes here for over 20 years, I've seen what actually matters. And stick with me, because in a few minutes, I'm going to break down exactly how different neighborhoods feel, not just what the numbers say. This is especially for you if you're coming from somewhere else. Maybe you live in DC right now. Maybe you're in New York or California or Texas, Illinois. Maybe you've lived in a city where you've had to be very aware of your surroundings all the time. Or maybe you haven't, and you're just trying to understand what to expect when you move to the DC, Northern Virginia area. Either way, this is one of the most important parts of your decision, because where you live is not just about the house. It's about how your life feels in and around that house. And later on, I will show you how this directly impacts home values, because that part surprises a lot of people. Let's get something clear right away. There is no such thing as a place with zero crime. It just does not exist. Not in Northern Virginia, not in the suburbs, not anywhere. So if that's the standard, everything fails. What you're really evaluating, whether you realize it or not, is a little more nuanced. You're evaluating how often things happen, how predictable those things are, and how much they actually affect you and your daily life. And that's where Northern Virginia tends to stand out. Because compared to most major metro areas in the country, things here are generally more stable, more predictable, less chaotic. That doesn't mean nothing happens. It just means it does not define your experience of living in the area. And that distinction, that's the whole game when choosing where to live. Now, let's talk about the comparison that's always in the background. Northern Virginia versus Washington, D.C. Because for a lot of people, that is the real decision. And the truth is, D.C. is complicated. There are parts of Washington, D.C. that are beautiful, vibrant, incredibly livable, places where people walk everywhere, eat at great restaurants, and love their neighborhoods. And there are parts of DC that are still dealing with real challenges. Both of those things are true at the same time. I had a couple that I worked with during COVID. They were living in DC in a small apartment right in the middle of everything. They loved it. They could walk to dinner, walk to work, walk to everything. And then overnight, everything changed. They were both working from home. The city slowed down, and suddenly they were spending almost all their time inside together in about 800 square feet. And they called me and said, "We need space." Not because they stopped loving DC, but because their needs changed. So we started looking just across the river. They ended up in a townhouse just outside Old Town, Alexandria. Still close, still connected, still very much part of the same region. But when I checked in with them a few months later, What they said stuck with me. They said, it just feels calmer. And that word, calmer, is something you're going to hear again in this video. One thing I always try to explain to clients is that Northern Virginia is not just one thing or one place. It's not just safe or not safe. It's a spectrum. And where you land on that spectrum depends on what kind of lifestyle you want. If you're drawn to places like Clarendon, Ballston, Roslyn, or Old Town, you're choosing energy. You're choosing walkability. You're choosing restaurants, nightlife, people out and about. And with that comes a certain level of activity. Not danger necessarily, but activity. More people means more movement. More movement means more things happening. You might see more incidents. You might hear about things more often. Not because the area is unsafe in a broad sense, but because it's alive. Now compare that to something in somewhere like Vienna or Falls Church or parts of North Arlington. Tree-lined streets, neighbors who know each other, people walking dogs in the evening. It just feels different. And then you go even further out, Burke, Fairfax Station, parts of Loudoun County, and it gets quieter still. More space, less density, and fewer incidents, but also less walkability and longer commutes. So the real question becomes, what kind of environment do you feel most comfortable in? And if you're not sure, that's exactly the kind of thing that I help people figure out every day. Now, let's talk about the numbers. Briefly, but in a way that actually helps. In Northern Virginia counties like Fairfax, Arlington, Alexandria, violent crime rates tend to fall somewhere in the range of roughly 100 to 300 incidents per 100,000 people. That's low. When you cross into Washington, D.C., those numbers jump significantly, closer to 900 or even 1,000 per 100,000 people. That is a real difference. And when you compare that to other cities like New York City, Los Angeles, Dallas, Chicago, or San Francisco, Northern Virginia consistently comes out as more stable overall. But here's the key. Don't get lost in these numbers, because numbers don't tell you how a place feels at 9:30 at night when you're walking your dog. And that is what actually matters. And this is where I want to make it personal for just a minute, because I think it matters. I've lived in Northern Virginia for over 30 years. And in that time, I have had a few things happen. I had a car stolen once in Arlington. Another time, I had a window smashed when I was parked in downtown DC. And more recently, right here in Alexandria, in our own condo parking lot, my wife Deborah's car had the window smashed and the airbag stolen. So let's be very clear about something. Nobody is immune from crime. If you live in or near a major metro area, things can happen. But here's the part that really matters. Despite those experiences, Deborah and I, and honestly, most people we know, generally feel safe living here in Northern Virginia. And I think that distinction is really important. You do have to be smart. Lock your car. You stay aware. You don't do anything careless. But compared to most cities that I have spent time in, it just feels different. Less tension, less unpredictability, and if you've lived somewhere where you're constantly on, you'll feel that difference pretty quickly here. And I'll add one more layer to this, because this also shaped how I think about safety here. Several years ago, I actually went through the Alexandria Citizens Police Academy. This wasn't just a one-day thing. It was an 8 to 10 week program where, from a citizen's perspective, you really get an inside look at how a police department actually functions. We learned about how crime is tracked and reported, how different divisions of the department operate, how officers are trained, how decisions get made in real-world situations. But what really stood out to me was the hands-on exposure. I did a ride-along with a police officer in Old Town, Alexandria on a weekend night. I sat inside the 911 call center and listened to calls coming in real time. I heard directly from detectives and officers about what they deal with every day here in Northern Virginia. We toured the department, watched training drills, and saw how everything fits together behind the scenes. And what that experience did for me was shift my perspective. Instead of just hearing about crime from the outside, I started to understand how the system actually works, how things are handled, how quickly police departments respond, and how much coordination is happening behind the scenes that most people never see. It did not make me naive about crime. If anything, it made me more aware. But it also gave me a level of confidence in the structure, the professionalism, and the way that safety is managed here in Northern Virginia. So when I talk about safety in Northern Virginia, I'm not just talking as a resident. I'm talking as someone who's had the chance to see a lot of this from the inside. And when you combine that with living here for decades and helping clients navigate these decisions every day, you start to get a much clearer picture of what safe really looks like here in Northern Virginia. Now, let's talk about how all of this connects to real estate, because it absolutely does. Safety, or even the perception of safety, plays a huge role in how quickly homes sell, how strongly they hold value, and how desirable an area becomes over time. But it's not as simple as lower crime equals higher prices. I've seen areas with more activity, more density, perform incredibly well because they offer something else that people want: walkability, convenience, proximity to jobs. I had a client in McLean, right near Tyson's, and over the years, they watched the metro go in, watched the Capital One campus rise. Their property value went up significantly. So again, it's about balance, not perfection. At the end of the day, living here in Northern Virginia does not require anything extreme. You don't need to live in fear. You just need to live with awareness. Lock your doors, pay attention to your surroundings, and use common sense. That's it. And for most people, that is a very comfortable way to live. So here's the honest answer. When it comes to safety and crime, Northern Virginia is not perfect. But compared to most major metro areas, it is one of the most stable, predictable, and livable places that you can be. And more importantly, it's a place where, for most people, life just feels a little easier, a little calmer, a little more under control. If you are trying to figure out where you fit into all of this, which neighborhoods give you that balance of lifestyle and peace of mind, or what makes sense at your price point, reach out. I put together a pretty detailed breakdown of Northern Virginia neighborhoods based on exactly this, and I'd be happy to send it over to you. No pressure, just clarity. And if this video helped you think about things a little differently, subscribe, because I break down Northern Virginia in a way that most people do not. At the end of the day, this isn't just about crime statistics. It's about how you live. And that's something that is worth getting right.